Imagine a crime so profound, so utterly defiant, it didn't just steal riches or power, but literally rewrote the rules of human survival. We're talking about a heist that saved millions of lives, yet the thief risked everything, not for gold, but for a book. Today, we're diving deep into the chilling true story of a 14th century barber-surgeon who committed this impossible act, an act that cracked open the dark ages of medicine and laid the groundwork for everything we know about saving lives today. Get ready, because Tactix is about to uncover the secret history of the heist that literally changed the world. To truly grasp the breathtaking bravery and the sheer audacity of this man's actions, we first have to understand the nightmare world he lived in. Picture the 14th century, a time when life was cheap and death was an ever-present shadow, especially on the battlefield. War wasn't just about clashing swords and arrows. It was a grueling, bloody mess where a small cut could become a death sentence. Soldiers weren't defeated by enemy steel as often as they were by something far more insidious: the invisible rot that crept into every wound. A hero might survive a dozen battles only to be taken down by a simple scratch that festered and turned his arm black. This wasn't just unfortunate, it was the brutal reality. Infection, that silent killer, was more efficient than any blade. It swept through armies, wiping out more men than any opponent ever could. And what was the medical response to this horror? Often it was more terrifying than the wounds themselves. Medicine was a slave to old traditions, to ancient beliefs, and to strict church rules. Doctors, if you could even call them that, clung to theories from 1,000 years ago, ideas that had no basis in reality. They'd prescribe bloodletting for everything from a fever to a broken leg, believing that getting rid of bad humors would cure the patient. Imagine lying there, bleeding out from a battle wound, only for the healer to open another vein, making you weaker while the actual problem festered. It was a terrifying dance with death. The battlefield wasn't just a place of slaughter. It was a place where common sense and scientific thought were considered heresy. Where prayer was often the only prescribed treatment for a severed limb, and genuine healing was often seen as witchcraft. This was the world that desperately needed a revolution, a world where keeping even the simplest knowledge was a daring act of rebellion. Now into this grim landscape stepped our unlikely hero, a figure whose name was deliberately lost to history, but whose impact echoes through time: a fugitive barber-surgeon. He was a rogue architect of change, an outlaw driven by a fierce, almost desperate desire to protect the living. Unlike the cloistered physicians who debated ancient texts in comfortable university halls, this man worked on the front lines of suffering. He saw firsthand the devastating failure of traditional medicine. He watched as his patients died from preventable infections, as wounds turned gangrenous, and as good men wasted away for lack of basic care. He knew the sacred codes of silence, the guilds that protected their outdated knowledge, and the church that condemned any challenge to its dogma. But he broke them all. He realized that the old texts, the ones they all swore by, were not just failing, they were actively harming people. So in the shadows, in the medical underground, he started to document the forbidden. He was not just a doctor, he was a spy for humanity, carefully, painstakingly gathering data from the dying to protect the living. Every treatment, every outcome, every success, every horrific failure, he recorded it all. He was building a new understanding of the human body, not from dusty scrolls, but from the raw, bloody reality of survival. He defied the powerful medical guilds who saw him as a threat, whispered about in fear, not because he was dangerous, but because he dared to challenge their authority with something they couldn't counter: results. Let's stop for a moment and look into this moral abyss. Imagine you are this surgeon on a blood-stained battlefield. You possess a secret salve that could stop an infection, a knowledge born from years of desperate observation. But your guild and your church forbid its use, calling it heresy, a dangerous deviation from established wisdom. If using that secret meant saving 1,000 soldiers from agonizing death, but facing death at the stake yourself for defying the rules, would you burn the book to save your life? Or would you burn yourself to save the future? Tell us your choice in the comments below. The stolen ledger, the very heart of this story, was no ordinary book. It was a veritable secret manual of survival, a collection of insights and procedures so far ahead of its time that it almost feels like science fiction. Inside its leather-bound covers, written in careful, desperate script, were detailed observations and unconventional ingredients that predated modern antiseptics by 700 years. Think about that for a second. While the established medical world was still theorizing about bad air and imbalances of humors, this barber-surgeon was documenting practical methods to clean wounds, understanding, perhaps instinctively, the need to prevent decay. He wasn't just guessing, he was observing, testing, and refining. The ledger described the radical transition from superstitious bloodletting, which, as we mentioned, often hastened death, to practical wound management. This meant cleaning a wound with things like wine or vinegar, using fresh bandages instead of dirty rags, and perhaps even understanding basic stitches for closing deep gashes. It also laid out the agonizing but necessary art of cauterization, a technique still used in some form today. Imagine the searing pain of a hot iron applied to a gushing wound to stop the bleeding, a procedure often done without any anesthetic beyond a strong grip and a prayer. It was brutal, but it worked. These were not just theoretical recipes. They were the first tactical protocols for trauma management in human history. A step-by-step guide to keeping people alive when everything else failed. A true roadmap out of the dark. The impact of this book was immediate and strategic, rippling through the very fabric of European power. As the secrets of the ledger slowly, surely began to spread through the underground networks of field surgeons and those desperate for survival, the balance of power across the continent started to shift. Monarchs, ever pragmatic when it came to maintaining their authority and fighting their wars, quickly realized a profound truth. Keeping experienced veteran soldiers alive was far cheaper and far more effective than constantly training expensive, inexperienced peasant levies. Think about it. A seasoned knight or a skilled archer, hardened by years of battle, was a valuable asset. Losing him to a simple, treatable wound was a colossal waste of resources. Training a new recruit from scratch took time, money, and effort. And that new recruit wouldn't have the same battle-hardened instincts. So survival became a logistical weapon, a core component of military strategy. Suddenly, smaller, highly disciplined elite professional units, backed by these rogue surgeons who understood the ledger's wisdom, began to dominate the battlefield. They could fight harder, recover faster, and return to the fray when their enemies were still succumbing to the invisible killer. This was a game changer, fundamentally altering how wars were fought and won. Because of its undeniable power, this book quickly became the most hunted object in the Western world. It wasn't about land or gold anymore. Rival European monarchs didn't just want the treasures of their enemies, they wanted the ledger. They knew that whoever held its secrets possessed an insurmountable advantage on the battlefield. Intelligence networks, as sophisticated as any we might imagine today, were mobilized. Spies, couriers, and clandestine agents scoured the continent, tasked with intercepting these contraband pages as they moved through the underground. The fugitive surgeon's notes were more valuable than a king's ransom, because they represented the ultimate military asset, the ability to return from the brink of death. It was the original strategic advantage, a medical edge that could swing the tide of any conflict. Consider this strategic irony. The surgeon who changed history had to die in anonymity to keep his secrets alive. He chose a life of a ghost so that his work could become a god. His name is forgotten, his face unknown, yet his wisdom lives on. Is it better to be a celebrated name in a failing system, lauded by a society clinging to outdated ideas, or an invisible force that builds a new world from the shadows, making the ultimate sacrifice for the greater good? Drop a like if you respect the hidden truth, and let's debate his legacy in the comments. The spread of this forbidden knowledge, once unleashed, became unstoppable. It found its ultimate ally in another revolutionary technology, the printing press. As the printing press revolution began, churning out books and pamphlets at an unprecedented rate, copies of the stolen text, or at least its core principles, were forced into the hands of a new, powerful class: the mercenaries. These soldiers of fortune didn't care about religious tradition or guild rules. They valued results above all else. If a method kept them alive and fighting, they used it. Mercenaries traveling across Europe and fighting for whoever paid them became unwitting carriers of this medical revolution. They brought the secret protocols into the long wars of Europe, setting up the first permanent military hospitals. These were not mere sick tents. They were places where systematic care, based on the ledger's methods, was implemented. The very stolen nature of the text, its lack of official endorsement, was exactly what allowed it to bypass the gatekeepers of the elite medical institutions. It was an underground movement, powered by necessity and spread by pragmatism rather than academic truth. Here's a staggering tactical truth, one that should make you pause. The survival protocols found in that stolen 14th century ledger, born from desperation and rebellion, are the direct ancestors of the trauma management techniques used by elite units in 2026. That's right. 700 years later, we are still using the logic of a fugitive who chose results over tradition. The fundamental principles of wound care, infection prevention, and immediate intervention that he meticulously documented in the shadows are the bedrock of modern combat medicine. The most dangerous weapon in a medieval arsenal wasn't a sword, an arrow, or a siege engine. It was the instructions on how to survive one. It was the knowledge that allowed soldiers to heal and return to fight, turning individual survival into a strategic force multiplier. This single act of intellectual theft, this quiet rebellion in the darkest corners of a brutal age, didn't just save lives, it accelerated the end of the entire feudal era. By making the common soldier more valuable, because he could be saved and return to fight another day, and by making survival more predictable, the ledger paved the way for the rise of the nation-state. Monarchs began to invest in their armies, not just in their weapons, but in their health and well-being. Medicine was no longer a matter of faith, a subject for theological debate. It became a matter of state security, a vital component of national power. The stolen book proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that a grain of sand, a few pages of ink, could bring down an entire empire's social order, replacing superstition with science and dogma with data. History is often decided by those who hold the secrets of survival. One stolen book rewrote the mechanics of a continent. Drop a like if you find peace in the hidden mechanics of the past, and stay tuned to Time Tactics as we continue to see the world in a grain of sand. Join us next time for more untold stories.